Hi everyone, how are you all? Um, we'll just wait for people to join and leave comments for us, introducing yourselves and letting us know you're here. And I think this is the first time we're doing on YouTube,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
first time.
yeah. So whoever has heard us before and listened to us chat, this is Surabhi. She is a canine nutrition and behavior consultant from Bucks. You can obviously expand on this, Surabhi.
Yeah, thanks, Sajanya. So yeah, I think like Sajanya said, I am a canine nutrition and behavior consultant. I run my own practice based out of India called Luchi in Muttons. And I graduated from Bhaks earlier this year. Earlier, yeah, it feels like it's been a while. Earlier this year. Yeah. Sajanya,
Yeah,
you want to tell us a little bit about dog parmis and yourself?
yeah. I mean, I just finished 3 years, and I can't believe it's been 3 years. Oh my goodness. Yeah, but I feel like we have been chatting for so long in terms of just you know as part of being Bach students and community that it feels so
Mm-hmm.
good to have people like you and Anushri and all of you, as part of this journey. So yeah, Doc Promise, yeah, canine behavior consultant as well from Vax. And I've been consulting for 3 years now. And I think this is the time I felt like, I'm ready to be doing a lot more of these conversations. And interestingly, as I put up on my Facebook post, right? Like I put up a post on Sniffari, and somebody asked, what about your dog's toileting then? If you're not taking them on regular walks, and I felt like it was a good conversation because I tend to have these conversations with my clients constantly about um, just talking about your dog's toileting needs, and I have experienced a variety even within Sammy and Zoe. I've seen so much, so I felt like it would be a good conversation for us to
Yeah.
have and just touch upon these concepts a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I'm glad you agreed to do this with me. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we'll just wait a minute and then we
Sure.
get started. What do you say?
Yep, absolutely. Sounds like a plan.
Varun
Do you
is
want to
here.
talk a little bit about what all we'll be talking about today as we wait for people to join in?
Yeah, so I think we want to start off talking about just basic elimination needs of our dogs in general, right? Like, what are their needs versus how they are being dealt with right now. Is it giving them enough choices, or it's more restrictive at the
Yeah.
moment? So we will cover that conversation.
Yeah.
Then we will obviously talk about how limited access to eliminate can create a lot of stress, how stress can also change, I think, the way the elimination habits are, right? And I think I have a nice story with Zoe to share in that aspect, so we can talk about that. And I think we can go back to toilet training, because a lot of
Mm.
conversations with puppies, the moment you get a dog home, I think
Yeah.
the first conversation is how to toilet train my dog.
Yeah.
And it's important for us to understand where we might be going wrong there.
Yeah.
And then of course, there's no conversation that we can have which where we don't highlight the fact that every dog is different and they can have different preferences. And finally, I think we can talk about, a pee and poop journal that
Yeah.
we can obviously share with people, that they can access and do, and,
Yeah.
maybe work with their dogs on that front. And of course, this is a standard that we want to maintain with all of our lives, which is, you leave your thoughts, you leave your comments, and we will try and then get to them as we discuss.
Yeah.
Sounds good, Surmi?
Yep. Sounds super comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the moment I brought this conversation and we
Mm.
were having a chat, I think the first thing that I'm sure both of us spoke about was the needs, the elimination
Mm.
needs versus what's the freedom our dogs are getting, and what's the choice that they're,
Yeah.
able to access with elimination. And I think when have my consultations with my clients as well, the first thing that I ask them is, do they have an access to
Yeah.
eliminate at a particular spot, whatever is the spot, right? We are not obviously asking your dogs to eliminate in the entire house. Obviously that's not the point of the conversation. The point
Yeah.
is, do they have access, that when they need to eliminate, do they have an
Yeah.
access at any point? And it's very interesting that some people do have that
Mm.
already for their dogs, which is great,
Yeah.
but a lot of people don't,
Yeah.
which means that they end up taking their dogs for walks multiple times through the day, or there's a lot of stress around
Mm, mm,
toileting
mm,
accidents. And I feel like this is an
mm.
important thing for us to, talk about. How have you experienced this? Firstly, obviously, as a dog parent yourself, but also
Yeah.
when you discuss with clients, what have you seen as a general, you know, habit the dog parents seem to have?
Yeah, I think from a client perspective, I think very similar to yours. I think again, indoor access is common in some cases, not so common in other cases. But I think there's just so much to unpack with toileting behaviors and habits, because I think one is that for most people, and especially if you're a first time pet parent, it seems like the assumption is that dogs will pee only 2-3 times a day, right? And they will pee and relieve themselves on walks. And I think both those things are sort of clubbed together. So I
Yeah,
feel like the first, there are so many things to sort of uh, there's so much misinformation to sort of unpack there, right? One, to separate the fact that, very much like humans, dogs can pee much more than 2-3 times a day. That's one part of it. And the second is then to separate, I think, elimination needs from walks. Um, because then we sort of look at both of those things together. So I feel like that's definitely something that comes up a lot with clients, but also I think in my own journey, as I learned, because I was a first time pet parent myself.
right.
And so I think that evolved for me over the course of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember clearly, when we brought Sammy, and
Mm,
and we had him from when he was a puppy, right? So in the initial 6 months or so, we were told by a trainer that walk him 4 times, and then then walk him 3 times, and walk him 2 times, and then
mm,
he will only pee when you walk him. So it was essentially bringing him down from 4 times, eliminating two times.
yeah.
And um we didn't ask these questions, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are the elimination needs of this individual? Is he holding his bladder? Is it
Yeah.
healthy for him? What are his preferences, in fact, right? We never asked these questions. And Sammy, being Sammy, was a very you know tolerant. Like, you do what you want to do, as long as and that even his don't handle me, my space is my
Yeah.
space, came much later. When he was
Yeah.
younger, he tolerated everything, right? So he
Mm,
was like, okay, you're taking me for a walk, I eliminate there and done, right? So we didn't have an opportunity also to think and reflect on these questions.
mm,
And we were given the advice also of this format. But when Zoe came, she was eliminating, like, I think about 7-8 times a day. And I was
mm,
like, is there something wrong with her? Is there, like,
mm,
does she have like a kidney issue? Does she have a problem? Is she not
yeah.
learning? Is it a toilet training issue? And we had a very, very hard time when it came to her, to a point where, I don't know if I mentioned this in one of my older lives also, where there was a trainer who would walk her, and he would essentially insert something in her bum
Oh my
to
God.
poop. And I saw that once, I guess, when they, from our terrace, and I was like, this is not okay, right? In the name of toilet training. And we stopped that, right? So I feel like um, we have so much of, yes, they need to only eliminate on their walks, and your walks can
Yeah.
go from 4 times to 2 times a day, and they only eliminate there, is such an unfair expectation to have on our
Yeah.
dogs, right? So I feel like, yeah, I wanted to share that because I realized that even between Sammy and Zoe, while we were given very similar advice, the dogs themselves were
Mm,
very different in the way they took the way we dealt with them. Where
yeah.
Zoe kind of showed us the way of, ask these questions. And when we asked the vet whether she has a kidney issue, and then they were like, no, no kidney issue. And
Yeah.
then when I spoke to Sindur about it, I very clearly remember that
Mm,
toileting was one
mm,
of the
mm,
initial issues that I,
mm,
had reached out to her, and she was like, maybe that's her body, that her
yeah.
body
Mm,
probably
mm,
needs to eliminate that many number of times if she doesn't have a health issue. Of course, we had already
yeah.
tested for health issues by that time, right?
Yeah.
So if there's no health concern and she's eliminating 6 7 times, and mind you, she was a very young puppy at that time, right? So
Yeah.
no bladder control, we'll come to that as well, right?
Yeah.
But it's so important to remember that elimination is such a basic biological need of an individual, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think we don't look at elimination that way in the dog
Mm.
behavior, dog training world, right? It's almost the first and
Yeah.
foremost point is toilet train your dog, right? But
Yeah.
toileting is such a basic, need of an
Yeah.
individual. And I feel like, and it's so different for every individual. It's different at the different, at different life phases, life stages,
Yeah.
different health concerns, different environments. Everything is affects this toileting
Yeah.
behavior, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, I mean, first things first, like, thank you so much, I think, for sharing that incident with Zoe, because I'm sure, like, it was so hard. But,
Yeah,
I resonate with, I feel it's also important to sort of share because there's just so much, like, weird stuff that people
yeah,
do in the name of
yeah,
toilet training. Um, and I think what I'm also, like, realizing as we're talking is that when we are talking about elimination, we are, I think, more focused on peeing behaviors than we are on pooping behaviors. Because again, I think it's the peeing behaviors that in general seem to get a lot more, um, attention and stress, both from the pet parent as well as the dog. Um, but yeah, I think that you know, for me, I think by the time mutton came to us, I had I think started my journey with barks. So I think it was a little easier with her. But I think with Lucci, what I had to spend an incredible amount of time doing was helping her unlearn that she could actually eliminate in the house. Because when she came to us, I think we had created just so much fear and stress about her eliminating in the house, including, timeouts, including, scolding, right? That I think that with her, it took us a really long time to get her to a place where she felt safe enough to eliminate and know that there was no consequence to that.
yeah,
And I think seeing that journey was also very, very painful because I think exactly to what you said, like it's such a basic biological need. Like I wish people spent as much time and as much thoughtfulness thinking about their dog's elimination as much as they did for their diet. Because when you see a dog like feeling stressed and fearful about engaging in something that's so basic and biological to them, like it's just a really heartbreaking journey. So I feel like we had to undergo that with Lucci significantly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. And I mean, I think, again, recollecting these things that we did to our
Mm.
dogs, right? It can be, very difficult. But, you know, unlike Luchi, where you realize she was controlling her pee because of fearfulness, I started realizing that Sammy was just holding his pee, waiting to go for walks.
Mm.
And now that I think about it, every time we took him for walk, it was the very second we stepped to anything that
Ah,
seemed like outdoors, even as much as,
yeah,
let's say, the elevator, he would pee and he would have accidents. And it hasn't I mean, it's interesting, it struck me now to think about it, that he's holding his pee so
yeah,
much
yeah,
that any access to outdoors is pee, like, I need to pee.
yeah.
And I think I want you to shine a little bit of light on this, of how holding
Mm.
pee, and controlling the bladder uh, can be a health concern as well for our
Yeah,
dogs, right? Because I
yeah,
know that you do work with a lot of this on
yeah,
your nutrition consults and
yeah,
everything. So I want you to, like, share a little bit of how
yeah.
it can be detrimental to our dog's health.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'll start by, I mean, if any of us, and I'm sure we've all had experiences, if any of us have had to hold our pee for really long, it's an extremely uncomfortable and stressful experience, right?
Yeah.
And so I think let's just start from that perspective. That, if we were to just like really empathize, like that's uncomfortable, right? And then of course I think, the two big spaces, and then let's, I mean, before I get into two big spaces, I think, and just thinking of that kind of discomfort and stress that again accumulates on a day-to-day basis, on an hourly basis, of course, that's going to have a toll. It's going to take its toll on the body, right? I think that's one part of it. But I think the two big spaces where this definitely comes up is one in, issues with incontinence, or incontinence as well as UTIs, right? For dogs, just recurring infections again and again. Because again, what happens is when all of that, the urine becomes a way for waste products and toxins to be released from the body. And when that urine is stored in the bladder, then there is a buildup of waste products. And toxins, right? And that makes your urinary system, your urethra, all of those key organs, prone to infections, prone to bacteria accumulation. But also all of those toxins and waste products, then because they are not excreted enough from the body, they also start taking a load on kidneys, because the kidneys play the role of filtering, right? And filtration. And so if the rate at which the kidneys are filtering versus the rate at which these toxins and waste products are excreted are not in sync, then that's the kidneys have to just do so much more work to pull that
Right.
out of the system. And that's when we start seeing, um, the that's when we start seeing kidney dysfunction, right? And
Right.
again, I think the thing about kidney dysfunction is that it doesn't happen overnight. It, takes a while to build. And that constant stress on kidneys, whether it's, and again, that could happen because, there's not enough fluid in the system for that filtration process to take place, or because, the urine is just sort of staying in the bladder, and the
Right.
toxins are constantly building up. Um, and the and so we start seeing kidney dysfunction, and the problem with kidney dysfunction is that it is irreversible. So once the kidneys stop, working effectively, or we start seeing ineffectiveness in the functionings of the kidneys, we can't reverse it. Then everything really is about just management, right?
Understood.
Unlike the liver, that undergoes its detoxification process, and there is scope for regeneration, detoxification with that organ. With kidneys, it's just much harder.
Right.
So I think that's definitely a big one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I remember listening to you when you did the live on kidney dysfunction, and I felt like, it was so important to share that information here as well, in terms of
Yeah.
how holding bladder, bladder
Yeah.
control and stuff like that can be so difficult for our dogs from health perspective. And of
Yeah.
course, coming back to what you spoke about, how uncomfortable it is just to hold, uh, and wait to, just eliminate it. It's a
Yeah.
very stressful, situation to be in, and not a great place to be. And I guess that is what we want to talk about in terms of having more freedom and
Yeah.
access to be able to eliminate, right? And I think, like you said, decoupling the idea of walks with elimination just allows us to think a
Yeah.
little more about where our dogs can access, without having to just insist that, they, eliminate on walks. And I've seen this issue come up with walks where, they are like, I'm walking my dog for an hour long and my dog is not
Yeah.
eliminating, probably because that's not what the body needs at
Yeah.
that point, or even a very stressful environment for elimination, right? I think these are few things we need to like think about as separate issues of walks versus, elimination. So I think looking at uh, how we can give access. In fact, I think when we moved homes in 2017,
Hmm.
and we had like a balcony space, like a huge balcony space for the dogs, and I was like, maybe let them, have that
Yeah.
access for, elimination through the day. And of course, we walk them in the morning, in the evening. And I think that kind of started our journey in understanding how to give them access,
Hmm.
you know uh 24/7, right? And I think that was a great starter, because I started seeing that Sammy needed to pee a lot more than just 2 times, because we were walking them only 2 times, right? At that time, he was already 5 years old by then. So I think we were just walking him twice, and he was, that is when I realized he's controlling his bladder a lot,
Mm,
right? Where he's only eliminating twice. I think what also happens is, when we are not prepared for that the dogs to eliminate at home, we see
yeah,
these eliminations, this pee and poop that might happen, as accidents, right?
yeah,
While not seeing that it is probably your dog's need to eliminate, and we need to figure something out for that.
yeah,
And later on, I think when we started giving them access at home, in the terrace and everything, Sammy was so communicative of his needs to eliminate. He would, and he was great, but he was very subtle. So he'd walk a couple of
mm,
times towards the terrace door, and he'd be
mhm,
like, I need to pee, I need to pee. And
mm,
then many times when that access was not there, he would, pee at home. So
yeah,
in a way, I'm glad he started doing that, because it was a sign that he was not controlling his bladder anymore. And
yeah,
he also started getting comfortable with the idea that this is a space where I can eliminate, and
yeah,
this is the place where I can communicate to my humans that I need to go here for eliminations. So I need to be there. So I think the moment we start recalibrating our own
yeah,
ideas around elimination of, first, it's a biological process, and
yeah,
every individual needs to have access to eliminating. I think we can start thinking of ideas of how to facilitate such spaces for our dogs,
yeah,
and we start seeing changes in their own ways of
yeah,
eliminating, to a point where I think at one point Sammy started peeing about 5 times a day. On a very
yeah,
stressful day or a very exciting day, he would pee, 1 or 2 times more. So, and we were not worried about it anymore, because
yeah,
it's not like I have to take him for a walk every single time when something happens, because he can't pee at
yeah,
home, right? So I think
yeah,
that was a great change, um, for us as well, in terms of once we
yeah.
started having a space for elimination.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like, and again, I think that, and I'm sure that um, you've done this with your clients as well, but I think just offering that indoor access is so important. Um, and it doesn't have to be a big space. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to live in a house with a yard to give your dogs access to that. You can do it in small terraces and balconies. I know of people who've been able to create that space in their own bathrooms as well, right?
Yeah,
And so I don't think it's so much about the space, like the size of the space, but it's just about giving them that opportunity to do it. But also I think to remember that, like, even with our dogs, because elimination is such a biological process, it is influenced by so many things in the environment, right? So I think you've already touched upon, like, stress and excitement. So I remember, like, with Luchi, before we had started the parks journey, like, her cup would get so full when people would come home, especially after she was left alone at home for a while, that once or twice it happened that somebody came home, somebody engaged with her, and immediately she relieved herself in front of them, right?
right,
Or even things like, I think we've spoken about health conditions in terms of the internal environment, but also things like temperature. Like, if it gets really cold, and
cold,
now, like, in at least in Delhi right now, we're seeing a shift in temperature where it's getting colder. Like, if it gets cold, like, even humans wake up in the middle of the night and pee, right? And that could seem like an out of normal habit for some of us, but I think, like, even things like that influence elimination so much. And so I
right,
think that this expectation that my dog's habits will stay the same irrespective of what happens around them is a really unfair expectation, because that's not how it works for us,
yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think we never have like a standard habit of a
yeah,
lot of things that are just general routine, right? So I think it's an unfair expectation, obviously. And coming back to, like, excitement being, I think Sammy
Mhm.
had that too. There's and I think we also have to point out to the fact that elimination is a a stress response as well,
Yeah.
right? Like, in terms of, we see this in our dogs so frequently, especially when they're stressed or
Yeah.
anxious. It happens when they're excited as well. We see changes in their poop patterns, poop habits. The moment there's something stressful, they might have constipation, they might have like loose motion. So it's important to understand the effect of environment and situations and interactions on
Yeah.
their elimination habits, which goes back to the point that I was talking about in terms of how there have been situations when the clients have come back and told, I've walked my dog for like an hour, and probably it's a good idea to look at the environment you're walking your dog
Yeah.
in, because probably it's not the right one for them to
Yeah.
eliminate, right? So I
Yeah.
think so much of their elimination needs and habits and preferences are,
Yeah.
one, obviously internally, uh, motivated, but also how much is happening externally in terms of
Yeah.
what interactions they're having, what environment they're in, what access they have, how
Yeah.
people around them are responding to their
Yeah.
elimination, right? So
Yeah.
I think,
For
um,
sure.
I think these are all the conversations that we need to be having when we're talking about toilet training. And I think this is a good time to think about,
Yeah.
where we might be going wrong when we talk about toilet training for puppies. Because I recently had someone reach out to me about a couple of months back saying that, I have a dog who's 2 months old or something, and uh, they are not toilet trained, and then they're peeing, all over the
Mhm.
place. And I was like, that is such a young dog. Like, two
Yeah.
3 months old dog is such a young puppy with very minimal, the not the right kind of developmental skills at that point to be able to know, okay, this is the toileting space that I have access to, and this is where I need to eliminate. No bladder control, because the
Yeah.
muscles are not developed yet to be able to, get into a particular routine, or even if you have to hold your pee. I mean,
Hold. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we tend to hold our
Yeah.
pee when we need to, because we
Yeah.
have that bladder control,
Yeah.
at this point. But as a young infant, you're unlikely to
Yeah.
have that,
Yeah.
that ability. So I think such a young dog, and you're looking at toilet training them and expecting them to
Yeah.
learn what you're trying to tell them,
Yeah.
I think that is probably where we are starting wrong in terms
Yeah.
of the kind of expectations we have at that young age from the puppies.
Yeah.
What about, like, have you encountered, dog parents asking at such a young age for toilet training? Plus, what else do you think we might be doing wrong at that point?
Yeah, I think when it comes to toilet training, especially with puppies, or even actually like, I've never raised a puppy. You have had that experience. I've had adult dogs, but again, I think this portion is a little similar. I think one is, puppies in general don't gain bladder control before like 4 to 6 months of age, right? So it's like expecting like a toddler to start like reciting poems, when they
Yeah,
just don't have the skills to do it, right? So I think one is, I think being aware of that. And I don't think that when people bring home puppies, they're actually getting that information, just saying,
yeah,
listen, don't even think about toilet training till your puppy is like 4 months or 5 months old, because, you know that these accidents are going to happen. So I think that's
right,
one part of it. But I think the other part of it is also just the culture around how we toilet train, right? It's very, um, and this is where I think I experienced a lot of it when we brought both Luchi and Mutton home, because when they came from the shelter, it was obviously stressful, exciting, new space, figuring routine out. A lot of those similarities existed, and I think
right,
in general the culture around toilet training seems to be to when the puppy or dog pees in a spot that they're not supposed to, you know correct that behavior, right? Or like
right.
scold or say no, or create this kind of stress which actually makes it just so much more worse, right?
Yeah,
And I think it's made out to be this very like complex process that needs to happen for our dogs. But I don't think it's that complex. It's actually fairly simple. I think the expectation management is in the fact that it's a process that takes time and patience. And,
Right.
pet parents have to be consistent with it. But I think it's fairly simple. I think that dogs themselves, prefer certain spaces and spots to pee on. They very quickly make those associations in terms of what feels appropriate to them or not. And again, I think it's not about what feels appropriate to the human, but also what feels appropriate to them, right?
Right.
They're not likely to pee around in spaces that they sleep on or eat in particular. Like I remember, and I think I mentioned this in our previous home. Mutton used to pee in the terrace, and for some reason, I had to switch feeding positions. And Luchi started eating in the terrace. Mutton refused to go there and relieve herself anymore, right? So I think there are some of these pieces that do kick in for them.
Right.
Um, I think it's just important to be patient and know that it will take time, right?
Right.
I think that is where so for me, it's not so much about training. Again, it's not toilet training the dog. I think it's managing expectations of the pet parent during that process.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, I think you mentioned they don't pee where they sleep and where they eat, right? And I remember like when we discussed that this is the topic we are going to be talking about in this live. He's so cute.
Luchi is like, you're
Yeah.
talking about pee. I have lots
Yes.
to say about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think some things that we need to also remember is how the puppies were when they were very young, because I have seen that. So Zoe came home to us as a very young puppy, right? I think I made the mistake twice and never again, but she came to us as a very young puppy. And obviously she was kept in whatever condition she was at the breeders, and then she came home. And back when she came home also, I remember that I was living with friends in a shared flat. So I remember that we used to the two of us used to stay in a single room, and it used to be a very small room. And she'd eat there, she'd sleep there, and she'd eliminate there
Mm,
because she was a young puppy also, right? Like, can't take them out for in environments without vaccinations and stuff like that. So I think that stayed so much in her younger, puppyhood experience, that today I see that happening in her elimination habits, where
mm,
she does not always realize that this is my sleep place and this is my, food
mm,
place, and I can't eliminate there. And I think that's also something that have been thinking about in terms of her elimination habits, because I'm like,
mm,
we know that dogs don't normally, like, pee and
mm.
poop where they eat, where they sleep, but she tends to do that. And then the more I think about it, the more I realize how it goes back to her early
Yeah,
days.
yeah.
And I remember she was also a very stressed dog, which meant that she I remember people asking us to put her in crate, and she would pee and poop in the
Mm,
crate as well, right? So I think, obviously we didn't let her be in the crate for a very long
yeah,
period, but then even in those, so where she would stay and where she would eliminate, where
yeah,
she would eat, became such, small spaces
yeah,
that, it became like a single space for her. And she didn't, I
yeah.
think it remained in her for,
Mm,
all her life, though even today we have managed to get
yeah,
out of that, as much as possible. But I think a lot of what their
mm,
early life looks like also has such
yeah,
an important effect on all of this, right? Like, even the early days matter so much for
yeah,
puppies. And I think, coming back to what you were saying in terms of its expectation management for us, and
mm,
also understanding that we need to be patient, we need to take time, we need to understand where they are at in terms of their skills, their body developmental,
yeah,
stage that it is at, and managing, our expectations. And also, I think, as you rightly said, nobody tells them, like, I know this is obvious when you think about it, that this is an elimination
mm,
need, basic biological need. But I think with so much of overwhelming information out there of toilet training, your dogs need to,
yeah,
do toileting in this manner. I think we don't also question it in terms of, okay, this is
mm,
basic,
yeah,
biological need. This is how
yeah,
our dogs need to eliminate. So I think starting out our puppies at that stage, I think that is where probably our expectations, our understanding of what this really is.
Yeah.
It's not a toilet training issue, it's just understanding elimination needs of your dog specifically, right?
Yeah.
So I think these are important things to think about whether you have a puppy or an adult dog coming home.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I told you about the street dog who's coming
Yeah.
home repeatedly, Laddu,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the first few days, he wouldn't, I mean, even now, he doesn't eliminate anywhere inside the
Mm.
house, right? And we have a plot, open plot right next door. And he would always go near the gate and he would whine.
Yeah.
And I didn't, then I'm like, okay, you want to be let out for, and he
Yeah.
would go pee and come back, right?
Yeah.
And that was his preference in terms of
Yeah.
elimination. We did, and it didn't happen at a particular time every single day. It was when he
Yeah.
needed to, right?
To,
And I
yeah.
think it became easier for me to read that with him, because
Yeah.
by this time I have also realized that it is different from for different dogs. Just
Yeah.
because Zoe tends to pee at this hour and at this
Yeah.
instance, doesn't mean that Ladu needs to do that as well, right? So I think
Yeah.
that was a great way for me to start off with Laddu, when we are
Yeah.
when we are looking at him. So I think whether it's adult dog or puppies,
Yeah.
looking at it as a basic biological need
Yeah.
uh, would be a good place to start, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, I think as you were sharing, like, I was also thinking about the, like, concept of, like, privacy, right? um Concept of privacy, but also I think just general demeanor. And I think you spoke about it a little bit. Like, I remember, I think for one client, the balcony that they had was facing the main road, where a lot of dogs would pass by, a lot of people would pass by, and this was a dog who was slightly reactive, and they'd get so frustrated that the dog refused to pee there, right? But I'm like, and it was a conversation to have, to say, but is this the right environment?
Right,
Can you, I mean, and I flipped that, right? At all points in time, can you necessarily pee when you have all of these different triggers around you? Like, that's not what you're thinking about in that point, right? And so I think things like those make such a huge difference.
right,
And even like small things, like when when your dogs are peeing, are you like watching them making eye contact while they're peeing? Like, it's weird, right? It's an invasion of privacy. So I think some of these concepts, like, are still, I think, taking up space in conversations in pet parenting, but I think they make a huge difference to how dogs end up eliminating and what that experience can look like for them.
right. Yeah. So I think more than just talking about having a space and access to a space to eliminate, I think it's access to the right kind of
Yeah,
place for your
for sure.
dog in
For
question, right?
sure.
I think Sammy was very comfortable as long as he had a space to eliminate.
Yeah.
I think he was very comfortable eliminating, wherever
Yeah.
was a designated space, so to say, bathroom
Yeah.
for him, right? But I remember I had this one client whose dog had hip issues, right? Which meant
Mhm.
that slippery bathroom tiles was
Yeah.
not a space that that dog was
Yeah.
comfortable with. Also, not very closed spaces, right? Because
Mhm.
the dog can get very worried about get
Yeah.
hurting themselves, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important not just to have a space that they need to eliminate, a place to eliminate, but also the right kind of place for
Yeah.
your dog, right?
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned this to you after, so very till very recently Zoe would be outside but also indoors, right? And
Mhm.
we know her patterns, and but still there are a lot of times she chooses to eliminate indoors, and we have figured out how to clean it up so we don't have any escalated frustration around
Yeah.
these issues. But then after Sammy passed, I started
Mhm.
realizing that Sammy would pee, and sometimes if it is not cleaned up, and he would
Mhm.
pee like a couple of times and all of that,
Yeah.
Zoe would not want to go and pee there,
Yeah.
irrespective of whether she knows and she wants to, she just wouldn't, right? And I
Yeah.
think that also comes down to preference, like how you mentioned about
For
mutton,
sure.
right? Where she
For
wouldn't
sure.
want to go and then eliminate where
Yeah.
which he was being fed. I
Yeah.
think Zoe was just not ready to like eliminate if there was already a smell of
Yeah.
um pee there, right? So I
Yeah.
think it didn't hit me at that time because we always had Sammy when
Yeah.
Zoe was there. So it didn't strike to me that okay,
Yeah.
Sammy's pee might be the reason why Zoe is not being there. But
Yeah.
once he was not there, she was peeing a lot more outside, and I was like,
Yeah.
okay, it could be this
Yeah.
reason why she's not, eliminating. So I think these preferences are so individualistic to
Yeah.
our dogs in question. It could
Yeah.
be privacy, it could be
For sure.
space constraints, right? Especially if they have, any kind of pain, discomfort,
Yeah.
instability, and they're afraid of getting hurt. That's also important to consider. It's also, sometimes some dogs want someone to be there
Yeah.
around, when they're
Absolutely.
eliminating. So important to consider that as
Yeah.
well. A lot of times people just leave their dog in the balcony, pee and then come back, and then you
Yeah.
you go away. Rightly so, I think, well intentioned, where you want to give your dog privacy,
Yeah.
but maybe your dog wants the other thing, which is,
Yeah.
be there.
Yeah.
Also different surfaces, different
Yeah.
surface
For
choices
sure.
and stuff like that. I think
Yeah.
it's a good idea to try different things with your dogs, especially when they're
Absolutely.
not um, open to eliminating in a
Mm.
certain spot that you have
Yeah.
designated for them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the right spot. And I think, like, I am very picky, okay, with my washroom choices, and my, when
Yeah.
especially when we're traveling, or when we
Yeah.
are going, and I'm
Yeah.
very picky, and I feel like I'm holding out on my toileting needs than actually accessing whatever is available, right?
Yeah.
Unless absolutely necessary. And I
Yeah.
think it's fair to think about it in that manner, right? We
For
wouldn't,
sure.
unless like forced to or have no other choice.
Yeah.
I don't think we would want to eliminate when we're not feeling comfortable about the
Comfortable.
space,
Absolutely.
right?
100%.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think it's good to think about our dog's elimination preferences also in that manner. And of course,
Mm.
my elimination preferences might be different from yours. So same with our dogs,
Yeah.
right? Like they can
Yeah.
have very different preferences. So it's a good idea to kind of think about it in that manner.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that it's so interesting you're talking about different preferences because again, I see so much of a difference between Luchi and mutton. So for example, like mutton preferred soft surfaces to pee on. So even when we'd be out in the outdoors, she would choose to pee on grassy surfaces as opposed to concrete, right? It didn't bode very well when we would leave her at my mom-in-law's house because my mom-in-law's house was laced with Persian carpets. So once in a while, there would be about a stressful thing that would happen there. Um, but Luchi, on the other hand, isn't as picky, right? Mutton was also very independent in going out and relieving herself, but Luchi needs to be asked and offered, saying like, "Do you would you like to go out?" And then she'll process, think, and decide whether she wants to go out or not, right? And so even in the same household dogs can have such varied ways that
Preferences.
something
Yeah.
works for them. And I think that if we were to observe and engage and try and practice, I also think this is such a great way to like solidify like our relationship with them, right? Because what we are doing in those moments is that we are looking at how do we meet this specific need of yours. And the more we're able to meet that need, the more we're able to build trust, the more we're able to build safety and security in our relationship with them.
Yeah.
And so I feel like this also ties in to building that kind of, just secure connection and relationship with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what happened with Sammy, right? Because initially we didn't realize that he's coming and telling us that,
Mm.
can you please open the door to the
Yeah.
terrace? I need to go and pee. And the more I observe, the more I realize that he's trying to
Mm.
communicate, and I'm able to respond as well, right? So I think, very rightly said that it's a great opportunity to, even build that relationship with our dogs. And in fact, I think even now, so we are having not one but two street dogs who are coming in and going out
Yeah.
as they wish. And Ladu is very specific. He doesn't want Lady, who's the other street
Yeah.
dog, to interact with any of us. So he doesn't.
Yeah.
So at the threshold of the door, they both stand, and then they keep having this, "No, you're not entering the house,"
Yeah.
kind of a communication. And I've seen a few times when Zoe is like, she's pacing, she wants to go out, she wants to
Mm.
eliminate, but then this is happening right at the threshold, so she can't go. A couple of times, she's eliminated in the house because she just doesn't have the access
Yeah.
to go out. And wanting to go out is also a very stressful situation, because those two
Yeah.
dogs are having a bit of a
Yeah.
stand off right there. And
Yeah.
sometimes when I have observed that, I'm like, okay, you want to pee, you want to go out, I'm here, I'll
Yeah.
de-escalate their situation, you want to
Yeah.
come out and pee. And that is a great way to just
Yeah.
respond and react to what our dogs are
Yeah.
communicating with us. And we may or may not be able to meet it, like for many times, even when I stand on the other side of the threshold and be like,
Yeah.
you want to come here, she's like, no, I don't want to, I'll probably be here.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
okay too, right? Because now I
Absolutely.
have seen it, and I have
Yeah.
understood that she wants to go out, but the space that she wants to go to is
Is not
getting too
accessible in
stressful.
that moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and stressful for her. So I might, and she speed there, so now I understand why she speed there. And there
Yeah.
is no like, I can't get frustrated at that point. I
Yeah.
can't get upset or stressed or angry at that point, right? Because I
Yeah.
understand what's happened there. So I think it's a
Yeah.
great way, like you said, to connect and
Yeah.
really, understand our dogs in that moment, right? The
Yeah.
moment we understand their preferences, their emotions around these things, I think lesser that we will get, frustrated with them
Yeah.
at that point, right?
For sure.
So
For
I think
sure.
that's a great point that you made. And maybe it's a good time to talk about pee and poop journal, because we
Yeah.
have obviously spoken so much about giving them access and learning about your dog's preferences, that I think a pee and poop journal could be a good way
Yeah.
for people to, I mean, it can be a practical thing that they can take away
Yeah.
from this talk. What do you
Yeah.
think?
No, absolutely. I feel like, at any point in time, it's so helpful to have some sort of like a baseline,
Yeah,
and especially if we're working with dogs who do tend to hold their pee quite a bit, who don't have access to, let's say, enough drinking water, who're older, just to get a sense of what is normal for them, right? And
right.
that normal looks very different for every dog. And so I think being able to sort of record a journal is really helpful. And I think the journal can be as detailed and specific as needed. I think something for me that was a game changer when I started doing a little bit of the P journal was actually recording the amount of time my dogs were taking to relieve themselves. And I think at one point there was some, like, I don't know, 45, 50 seconds, which I was like, that's insane. That's a lot. And so then I was like, no, 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 we have to create more opportunities, for elimination. So I feel like stuff like that can be really eye opening.
Yeah.
And then, if you have that as a starting data point, then, then you can just figure out what are different ways to help them meet that need for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I did P journal for Zoe, it was so interesting because, so mind you, by that time I'm like, Zoe's peeing so many times in the day, like, is there something wrong with her and is everything okay? And by this time, Sindhu had told me like 6 7 times, if that is what
Yeah.
is her biological need, that's what she needs, right? And in fact, actually, it was interesting because when we realized she needs to pee that many number of times, we were like, okay, fine, we can't walk her that many times. So
Yeah,
that was the transition when we were like, okay,
for
fine,
sure.
then we need to have some place that she can eliminate. Anyway, coming back to this, I remember I did the pee journal in 2020 during lockdown. So it was everybody at home at all times.
Yeah,
And I started seeing that she had started to pee a lot more when there's a lot more activity around the
yeah,
house, right? More number of people awake during through the day, lots of activity, lots of people. We were, I think, five people and two dogs at home,
mhm,
right? So imagine the amount of activity.
yeah,
Everybody is taking, work from home calls constantly. There's activity at home, and I started seeing that she was peeing a lot more on those days versus when there was lesser activity. Like, for example, everybody was in their own rooms taking calls, and we were,
yeah,
or maybe we were sleeping through the like, I have a habit of taking naps in the afternoon and stuff like that.
mhm,
So if we were sleeping through it, or
mhm,
lesser activity, there was lesser number of, the
yeah,
frequency of pee was much lower. So I
yeah,
think
for
that
sure.
was a big like revelation for me in terms of peeing habits for Zoe. And of
Yes.
course, that comes also back to the point of how they were sleeping lesser at that time because there's a lot
Mhm,
more activity. So less sleep, more number of, times that they were
yeah,
peeing. So I think for me, pee and poop journal firstly helped in realizing how change of environment, change of how
yeah,
things are around them can really affect one is their sleep and then their pee and poop, right? Both
yeah,
very
for
basic
sure,
biological processes, right?
for
And the
sure.
other that I realized was because we were trying to cater to Zoe's toilet training, so to say. We
Yeah.
wanted to understand her pattern, like, okay,
Mm.
when are the times she's choosing to eliminate,
Yeah.
and then it came down to the fact that every time she napped and woke up, she needed
She
to
needed
pee,
to go
right?
out. Yeah.
And the more we start facilitating it, right? So now I've
Yeah.
seen her wake up from nap, I take her,
Mm.
and then I'm like, this is your time to, like,
Yeah.
eliminate. And the more we did it more consistently initially, the sooner she realized that, okay, fine, this is where I need to pee and poop.
Yeah.
And it got so much better for us in terms of managing her, you know,
Yeah.
toileting habits, because at least 80%, 90% of the time she would eliminate in the designated place, which meant that, okay, fine, 10, 20% of the time she doesn't, and it's okay. That's something that I can manage, right? Because I started getting the idea of what her habit was, what her baseline was, right? And it's a great thing to keep going back when their environment changes, when their,
Yeah. For sure.
health is a little up and down, or,
Yeah.
things are changing. So I think that actually, was a great
Yeah.
uh, exercise for me to do, which is why I kind of encourage, especially
Yeah.
those who are looking to toilet train their dogs, or wondering their dogs toileting habits,
Yeah.
or want to start allowing for their dogs to, eliminate indoors in any place that they have access
Yeah.
to. I think a pee and poop journal could be a great starting point.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, I think I was telling you this when I started seeing Lucci relieve herself on a very neat basis. I also started seeing her put on weight, and
Right,
she was relatively underweight, and maintain that weight very consistently, something that she did struggle to do for a while. And I've been trying to sort of like look up linkage between the two, and maybe my keywords aren't correct, but right now I feel like the association that I can make is perhaps the stress of it, right?
right,
Because again, we know that stress can impact weight loss, weight gain. And I think that once she didn't feel the need to hold all of that, the physiological stress of it, etc., I feel like she was able to find consistency with her weight as well.
right,
And again, I think this change has been very recent. I think it's been a year and a few months. But that's also, I feel like, another, you know connection that comes
right,
up, which again, I think when we able to look at the pee and poop journal, it just gives us starting information to sort of explore and think about. So
right.
yeah.
Yeah. I think one last thing that I wanted to talk about, because I think it came up with a few clients, is that not all dogs want to pee indoors either,
Yes.
right? I remember, I think one of our friends from Barks community, her dog
Mhm.
was just absolutely unwilling to, eliminate, no
Yeah.
matter how many choices were given, um, to the dog to eliminate indoors, right? And I think this is not so much about a conversation of forcing your dog to,
Yeah.
like, eliminate indoors. It's about, one is finding spaces and access to spaces
Yeah.
where they can eliminate as and when they want to, which means that the more we do the pee and poop journal, we also understand where the
Yeah.
toileting habits come. So obviously all our conversation through this live has been about, okay, fine, find a space where they have access to 24/7, and it could be
Yeah.
indoors within your house environment. But even if you have to take your dog just outside your
Yeah.
house, or wherever, right?
Yeah.
At least you have realized what their habits are, and you
Yeah.
know what their communication is to you,
Yeah.
when they need to eliminate. I think that is also important to kind of acknowledge that maybe not all dogs want to eliminate
Yeah.
indoors for whatever reasons. I think before we come to that conclusion, obviously I would evaluate what are the different choices offered to the dog in
Yeah.
terms of what kind of spaces, what kind of surfaces that was available to the
Yeah.
dog, what kind of environment, what kind of health condition, all of this
Yeah.
put together, and then maybe come down to, okay, fine, the dog is just not interested in
Yeah.
eliminating indoors, but we're not obviously forcing them to do it
Yeah.
here either. That is also stripping them away of their choices, right?
Yeah.
Which means
Yeah.
that then you still have to evaluate what is your dog's elimination habits, and then be able to take them out when they need to, and still not
Yeah.
put them on a restricted
Yeah.
elimination routine. So I think that's
Yeah.
also an important thing to acknowledge, because one is, some dogs may not be able to, and I know I have had a couple of international clients where they said that they cannot, like if they are living in an apartment kind of a
Apartment, they
space,
can't. Yeah.
yeah, they do not have their dogs to eliminate in
Yeah.
this. So I think there are obviously valid reasons when some dog parents do not have
Yeah.
spaces indoors for their dogs to eliminate, but
Yeah.
the philosophy of it still comes down to the same thing, which is how do you give them access to spaces when they need to eliminate and not make it a very restrictive
Yeah.
biological process.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that goes back to, I think, what you started the live with in terms of the question. I think instead of, making it about long walks, like do quick pee trips, right? Which is, just going out, quick pee and coming back, right? Like
Right,
every time you take your dog out to pee, it doesn't have to be a full-fledged walk. It doesn't have to be, okay, this is our time outdoors. It can just be a quick pee break and back up.
right,
And that also works. And when we were living last year, when we were in a certain apartment complex, that our balconies were very small, so they didn't offer enough space for the dogs to pee. Like that's what I did. Thankfully, I had an elevator in the building, so it was easy for me to sort of quickly come down, pee, and get them up. You know,
right,
um, and that also works wonderfully, right? So again, I think it comes back to what is your dog showing preference to, what is possible within the environment. And I think just the fundamental knowledge that they just need access, they just need to be allowed to um, relieve themselves
right.
whenever the need arises.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's see if anyone has any comments, any thoughts, anything else to add on to what we have said. Otherwise, I think we have sort of covered everything well within the time limit.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't
Yeah.
realize, I was unsure of how long we talk this time. So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is very straightforward. We're talking about like elimination, but not bad. We did a full hour.
Yeah. Actually, even I was thinking that we don't have 1 hour worth of content to like talk for it, and fill the full hour. But then
Yeah,
I think it comes around the fact that it's at the end of it, one is changing our own ideas about this
yeah,
topic, right? Which is toileting and elimination needs, and our expectations, our ideas. Um, okay, one second. I think Kritika has a
yeah,
comment. Anyone who is new to all this without feeling overwhelmed, where can they start? I think a good place to start, firstly, would just be the idea that this is a biological need, right? We have obviously repeated that multiple times. And second would be, mm, I think when we remove all these things of you need to toilet here and you need to toilet, these many number of times on walks, if we take away these compulsions, what are our dogs exhibiting in terms of their habits? I think these two would be a good place to start, and the pee and poop journal would be a great, starting point to be able to understand our dog's needs. Of course, if we feel like you know uh, our dogs are having health issues, that's the first thing we did with Zoe, because we felt like she could have incontinence, she could have kidney issues, and she was quite young. We didn't know, so I think we did the health checkup, and then we were like, okay, it's not a health issue, so then it's a behavior issue, so to say. And then we came down to pee and poop journal. So I think those are good starting points, in my opinion. What do you think?
yeah, absolutely. I think fundamental is biological need. Know that there is no clockwork solution to this. It's a process that takes time and patience. I also feel like, I think especially when we have puppies home, when we get puppies home, I think we get very obsessive about this is the right spot to pee, you know.
Right,
And I would sort of walk away from that a little bit. If for the first couple of weeks as you're, getting your puppy familiarized, like put pee mats everywhere, right? Like let them find the surface that first works for them. I think that
right,
becomes really important. The spot will evolve, right? The spot
right.
will evolve the more they grow, the more they're able to sort of, tune into their needs as well. They'll pick up those things, but I would say start by giving access before you get obsessive and fixated about the spot. So I
Spot.
would say those two things is what I would start with.
Yeah, yeah. And with puppies, I think obviously it's very important to remember that it's just not possible, even like physically, for them to do this beyond before a certain time, right? So I think what you mentioned of just having access everywhere that they, they have access to, is a good starting point for our dogs to start, learning slowly, right? It's a slow process in the beginning. It'll take time, it'll evolve, as you said, and you got to be patient in the first few months of, your puppies, even if it's an adult dog coming into a new house and, new environment. Even when I moved homes. We moved home. I moved homes with the dogs very recently, because I got married recently, and the dogs moved with me. And even in the new house, we had to first figure out. I had to repeatedly take Zoe out to the front porch to tell her, this is your, toileting space. Sammy took to it like very quickly, but like Zoe took a while, to be able to understand. Okay, this is where I need to toilet. Even as an adult dog, a dog whom I have learned the preferences already, also takes a while, right? Because again, it's a new environment. She suddenly had changed in habits and everything, right? So I think it's important, firstly, to give them access everywhere and see where they start choosing to. And keep reminding yourself it's a biological. I think a good way to go about this when I have conversations with clients is, firstly, talk about how we would be very uncomfortable with something like this. And the second thing would be, talk about how why an access indoors is important, simply because there are certain times where it's emergency, right? Like, you may not be able to take your dog outdoors. And a good way to get me started on that is when I give them examples of what happened during lockdown and COVID, right? When, if you were quarantined, your dog was just not able to go. And then, there were dogs who were holding their bladder for long durations, and that became a very stressful situation at that time. You wouldn't want to be dealing with this when situations are already stressful for everybody at that point, right? So I think a good way to start off is just giving them an idea of how we would, you know s- respond if we were given restrictive access to, toileting. So I think that's a good starting point. And then what you mentioned, giving them access in the initial period everywhere, and then not be very obsessed or fixated on anything, that this is the right thing to do in terms of number of times they need to do, where they need to eliminate, or how much they need to. All of this, I don't think we need to be very obsessed about it, barring obviously if there's a health concern.
Yeah,
I hope
absolutely.
that answers your
Yeah.
question, Kritika. Because for the barks, way peeps, I feel it's easier for us to consider these concepts. Yeah, I think starting off with giving it the analogy of how we would feel would probably
Yeah,
be the
that's always
great
a
way
great
to.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think if no other questions, we have covered all the points. I think this is the same link that would work for people to watch later as well. So we can put this up
Yeah.
later on our social media channels for people who couldn't join us live.
Yeah.
And those who have heard us before, we will keep coming back. So if you have any topics that you want us to address, you can obviously leave it in comments or reach out to us on our social media, and we will make that happen. What do you say?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, so whoever stuck with us for the entire hour, thank you so much. And we will see you next, whenever.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much,
Bye.
Asanya.
Good
Bye.
night. Bye.